Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, and this is our final show before next Tuesday, the day previously known as Election Day, but now is called the last day of voting. Happy Femme Friday. Happy anniversary to women's suffrage. This election is 100 years since women were enfranchised in the United States. And if we learned anything this year, we learned that the fight for equity is far from over. Working women everywhere were on the front lines of this pandemic. Nurses and other health workers, teachers and other school workers, flight attendants and other service workers, and of course, all of the unpaid work of women everywhere, childcare, household duties. Gender equity isn't about leaning in. That's asking the victim to be responsible for her own liberation. Gender equity is a class fight to liberate the largest group of exploited workers in America, working women. If Joe Biden wakes up Wednesday as president-elect, it will be because women voted for him in record numbers, as is showing right now. In particular, working women, women of color. What we want in return is for President Biden to attack the systemic causes of gender inequity. Patriarchy is a condition of capitalism. Patriarchy defends entrenched economic advantage. Breaking glass ceilings is nice, but helping the women who are cleaning those glass ceilings is essential, as our previous guest, Mindy Easter, said. We have to rid capitalism and capitalists of their implicit bias against women. Exploitation comes so naturally when it is the patriarchy exploiting women. This is why we created Matriarch, to find and fund working women to run for office, to help them get through those systemic issues that block them from running successful campaigns, and to support the progressive agenda that will empower working women and, quite frankly, everyone. Joe Biden needs to see the economic revival of this country through the lens of those on the front lines, working women. Forget the pretty and pink feminism of upper-class, mostly white women. This is the gritty gloves and overalls work of making the economy work for the least advantaged among us. Bottom-up solutions to this economic crisis from the people feeling it, not top-down solutions, supposed solutions, like the Obama administration had. They worked it in 2008 and 2009 after the crisis, with Wall Street's Larry Summers and Tim Geithner spearheading our revival. That means adequate healthcare, Medicare for all. It means higher minimum wages, livable, adjusted to index. It means reliable childcare. It means a homes guarantee. And by the way, it means restoring labor laws so they protect the right to organize. Because some of the most important unions in this country are run by women and represent workforces of women. Teachers, flight attendants, health and hospital workers, people who are holding up this economy, an economy that has never given them a fair shake. Now, we need a president committed to looking after them. We need to convert this election into policies that support working women. Oh, and one last thing. If the Republicans try to steal this election out from under us, we need to be ready to fight back in the strongest way possible. And that may mean withholding from the patriarchs and the capitalists the one thing that they cannot live without. Nope. No, not that. That is a Greek play. Go look that up for another time. No, the thing that they can't live without is our labor, the work of our hands and our minds. If this country isn't ready for work for us, then we need to be ready to stop working for them. Women of America unite, and all of our allies. You have nothing to lose but your patriarch. We have a fabulous show today. I am so excited. We have Tithi Bhattacharya. I'm going to ask her how to pronounce her name properly because everyone that interviewed her said it a different way and I had no reference point. But I'm a big fan of her book, Feminism for the 99%. It is my Bible. And then we have Dominique Shuminova and Melahat Rafiei from Matriarch. And speaking of Matriarch, today is the day of Matriarch's Summit. If you have not gotten your tickets yet, please go check them out. The link is up on screen. Those are just some of our guests today, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern to 9 p.m. There are some other events going on. We are aware, but if you RSVP to this link, you will be able to watch the full event in its entirety afterwards. But of course, we'd love to have you there live. You go to that link starting at $27 a ticket. If there's economic hardship, we are, of course, flexible with that. If you can afford more, that's wonderful as well, because this is the money that helps us support working class progressive women running for office and do the trainings that are necessary to get them to the point that a big name may endorse them. Cori Bush is headlining the event. Barbara Smith is headlining the event. Jane McAlevey is going to do some training for us, which is exciting. And Sarah Nelson of the Flight Attendants Workers. Those are just a few of the names that are headlining this event. I promise you it is going to be super interesting, not just informative about what women are facing and have faced in the past, but why women are, working women in particular, and the progressive agenda that they push forward, an economic agenda, that is what is going to help get us out of this crisis. And we are going to roadmap that. Definitely go get those tickets when you have a chance. We start at 6 p.m. sharp Eastern. It's going to be an exciting event, and we're just really excited to do this for the first time. Would have been great in person, but hopefully next year we'll be able to do that. All right, guys, we will be back right after the break with a couple of stories at the top of my feed, and then we're going to go into an interview with our guest. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Make sure to click that subscribe button and that like button. You know the jam. We got to do it. We have to say it. It's part of the job now. I am so excited about our next guest. I have been in awe of her work for many years. I do need her to correct the pronunciation of her name so I get it right. But Tithi Bhattacharya. Did I get it?
Absolutely right.
What was that? Oh, I think
that was absolutely right.
Yay! I tried very hard. I listened to all these YouTube. I listened to many people interview you, but they're all over the place as they are with my name. Of course, Tithi is the co-author of Feminism for the 99%, a manifesto. She is associate professor and director of global studies at Purdue University, and she worked as a main organizer for the International Women's Strike in the United States, which hopefully we will have again soon. Tithi, it is a joy having you on. Thank you for being here. We start off with the show talking about it's been 100 years since women earned the right to vote in the United States, and we are just a few days before the election, but it doesn't seem like we've solved a lot of our problems. So I want to talk a little bit about this moment in particular. We are in the midst of an economic recession, possibly worse. Wages, there are poverty wages everywhere, inadequate health care, border policing, climate change, a housing crisis. These are the ordinary fears of families, and it seems like it's hitting women the hardest, as it always does, but very, very hard right this second. And it's not being discussed enough through the lens of women and working women this election cycle. Is that because this liberal feminism sort of has sucked up all the oxygen from the room?
Well, first of all, Nomiki, thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you for making time for talking about this. Because, as you correctly point out, so these issues loom before us right now, right? But I think if we go back to what you just said, has not been seen enough from the lens of women. Well, actually, the election is all about women, right? I mean, everybody is talking about, women being in power. For the first time, a woman is head of CIA. Women are, in positions of power as CEOs. So people are talking about women. But what people are not talking about, as you correctly pointed out, is working women, right? The ordinary women who are watching this show, who are at home struggling to make ends meet, whose poverty wages combined with the lack of childcare or any infrastructure of childcare in this country is creating an unbelievable crisis in families across the board right now. So I think we have to be very clear that if liberal media talks about women, we have to ask which women, right? Is it the women who have the right to close those borders, drone bomb our sisters in other countries, preside over these poverty wages in the workplace? Are we talking about those women? And are we celebrating the achievement of those women? Is this about Gina Haspel and lean-in feminism, or are we talking about the women who are the victims of these policies? And actually, I use the word victim advisedly. They want us to be victims of this policy, but we are the survivors of these policies, and we are the resistors of these policies. So let's talk about those women when we talk about women's issues or feminist issues, because feminism is a set of politics. It's not about women achieving power, but it is about the vast majority of women resisting the power which tries to control our lives.
You start off the book. I'm so happy. I mean, it was a great way to start off the book, talking about Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm quoting your book saying, in the spring of 2018, Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg told the world that we should, quote, it would be a lot better off if half of all countries and companies were run by women and half of all homes were run by men, end quote. And then you later say she, as a leading exponent of corporate feminism, Sandberg had already made a name and a buck for herself by urging women managers to lean in at the company boardroom. And as the former chief of staff of U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, the man who deregulated Wall Street, she had no qualms about counseling women that success won through toughness in the business world was the royal road to gender equality. This is what, I mean, reading that again today stood out to me in this crisis, because in 2008, Joe Biden and Obama-Biden administration appointed Larry Summers and Tim Geithner to oversee the crisis from the top up. Yet this crisis it can't be handled the same way. I mean, I even think that Joe Biden may realize that, whether or not he believes it, I don't think he has a choice. So what would you say at this moment is the leverage that working women, union leaders, unions that are led by women, unions that are made up of women, what leverage do they have in this moment, potentially with the Biden administration? Let's just start with that.
So, I'm sure you've seen Susan Faludi's piece in the New York Times this morning. I'm a big fan of Susan Faludi. I think, a Backlash was a formative text as I was trying to shape my feminism. But one of the things she says is that, she actually talks very powerfully in this New York Times piece about Trump's machismo. And she argues that even though people say that this is a vintage machismo, borrowed from World War II kind of, Iwo Jima go rah rah bomb everyone kind of thing. It is actually a very modern machismo. Trump's machismo is a very modern kind of masculinity, and that part is very powerful. But then she also goes on to argue that if we want to talk about a certain kind of masculinity, we have to talk about a masculinity that takes into account care and service-oriented masculinity, right? That's not about hitting people over the head or bombing people. It's about care and caring for communities and collectivities. And she writes this in the Times this morning, that Biden actually embodies that model of masculinity. And I was distressed to read that. I was very distressed to read that, because I've been writing about care and care work for a while now, and to me, the statements, forget Biden's history in backing segregation, forget Biden's history in the crime bill, in the drone attacks throughout the 80 years of Obama administration, through the immigration policies where Obama deported so many people. I mean, I'm forgetting all that, but just at this moment, with a fantastic BLM uprising across our towns and cities, after the terrible, terrible shooting in Philadelphia 2 days ago, Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, the presidential candidate, comes up and says, what we have to be careful about is looting. Okay, that to me is not a model of care. That to me is misrepresenting care. Care is about collective healing. Care is about whether our communities have resources, whether our communities have schools, whether women in these communities have not just have good jobs to bring up their children, but have safe neighborhoods for their children to go to school, have a safe passage from school to home rather than from school to prison, right? So that's what we call care, So to me, this feminist washing of Joe Biden is quite distressing, because it tells me that there will be challenges for us as a left with the Biden presidency, and we cannot let our guard down. If we're voting for Biden in these elections just to get Trump out, we cannot lose our tools of critical thought and lose our tools of analysis with the Biden presidency. In fact, we should sharpen them, because we're going to need it the most with the recession coming and a pandemic looming.
So this summer, as you mentioned, the BLM uprisings, it seemed as if the class consciousness around BLM and the legacy of slavery that is intrinsically tied to capitalism was started to spread in a way to folks who may not have been as aware of it. And I look at this moment and think, well, what would it take for us as a collective, women as a collective, to understand that capitalism, predatory, forms of capitalism, it's built off of exploiting women. I mean, how do we get to that point?
So, I mean, I think you mentioned unions before, and you're talking about collectivities, and I think it's really quite significant that the greatest tool that working women have, the strike. It was Sarah Nelson of the Flight Attendants Union in January of 2019 who first mentioned the general strike as a weapon to talk about to stop Trump from going ahead and shutting down the government, right? And I think that has been discussed in recent times as well. If Trump tries to hijack the elections after November 3rd, then working people should talk about a general strike. We should organize. And I mean, just to be clear, even if there isn't a general strike, and if folks if Trump is trying to hijack the elections, I think we should organize in our communities at the very least, because this will be an unprecedented thing to happen in any circumstances need to be opposed. But to go back to your question, so I think workplaces and shutting down the workplaces, which is the motor of capitalism, is a very important tool that we as workers have in this system. But I don't think our analysis needs to stop at the doors of the workplace and only pay attention to the wage gap or to unemployment figures, because then we fail to see the multiple ways in which wage work actually orchestrates the unwaged slices of our lives, So ecologists, I like to use as a model, they use the term cascade effect, right? As a concept to understand how primary extinction of a species can actually trigger multiple secondary extinctions, right? So I think that the wage, the capitalist wage, the tyranny of it has a similar cascade effect on our ability to live our lives. And this is most evident in the lives of women and most evident in the lives of women of color. So if we consider the health of Black women and Latinas during this pandemic, low wages certainly, determine the kind of healthcare these women have had or whether they've had it at all. But we should not only be concerned about low wages in the here and now. Historically, Black communities have been forced to live in neighborhoods that have poor air quality and or contaminated water. Black communities are 75% more likely to live near polluting industries, right? And women in these communities bear the brunt of these sort of historic tendencies of oppression. So we can't simply talk about wages when it comes to women, because unwaged labor of women hold up half of society. So it is the precondition to the wage.
And not to mention, I mean, just while I have a memory of Cori Bush, who was recently won the nomination in St. Louis against a decades-long congressman named Lacy Clay, part of the establishment. And she, during her campaign, she ended up what she thought getting COVID. But when she went to the hospital twice, the doctor said, well, we don't know. I actually saw her in the hospital, hooked up to the ventilator. So of course this is COVID. She said, they didn't diagnose me. Sure enough, there are countless reports coming out now about how women of color, Black women across America, are going into the hospital and not being taken seriously when it comes to COVID, which of course illustrates another issue that we face in the healthcare system. So it seems like we're primed for some form of a general strike. Women-led, whether they don't want to or not. it's those frontline communities, workers, that could show up for a strike and withhold their labor. But simultaneously, there is an opportunity to talk about these other systemic issues in a way that when the Black Lives Matter uprising, suddenly people started to understand their racial bias in a way that they had never been educated in school or in their communities, or nobody around them, white liberals weren't even aware. What kind of coalition building do we have to? I mean, it's very hard when you have this liberal Clintonian style, Hillary Clinton style feminism, and I would have to mention the Women's March. Like, it seemed like when the Women's March was being organized, they understood the need for a coalition to organize around what was probably, I would say, some progressive. A progressive platform for women, but it seemed to be taken over by this greater narrative, this more powerful narrative of white women's feminism. So how do we build a coalition without that happening?
So I think one of the things we argue in the book, the manifesto, is that just like we are talking about a feminism for the 99%, it is very vital that we talk about an anti-racism of the 99%, right? So Kamala Harris getting one of the top tickets of the land in order to be in the White House is not a victory for ordinary working class Black women, okay? It is certainly a victory for historical wrongs being justed. Okay, so that let's be very clear. To see a Black woman in the White House in America was unimaginable. So there is certainly a sense of achievement there, which we cannot underestimate, right? But we also cannot say that being in the White House is a positive thing, because the White House is symbolic of the heart of American empire, okay?
Right.
It is the heart of neoliberal austerity. The policies coming out of the White House are not going to be policies that talk about how to better the lives of ordinary working class Black women, okay? Whether a Black person is in the White House or not, as we saw during the Obama era, right? We saw Black poverty actually went up in the 80s of Obama's administration. But I was in Grant Park in Chicago in the night of 2008 with my 3-month-old infant daughter, just because it was such an exciting moment for millions of Black women that night, that, to be part of that was being part of history. But we knew as socialists and activists that Obama was not going to be our friend in the White House. So I think when we talk about coalition building, we have to start from the bottom. We cannot depend on the top. Okay,
that's right.
So that's the first thing, that we can't. No one's going to come to rescue us. We're going to have to do this ourselves. That's the first thing. We don't look for saviors from above. The second thing is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are actually histories of organizing that we have in this country. We've seen the brilliant BLM uprisings throughout the summer and continuing even today. Okay, there lies our resources for hope. Okay, now imagine right now the uprisings are sort of responsive to particular police acts of police violence, etc. But I can imagine a network building up between the activists in various cities, and some of those networks already exist. Movement for Black Lives already exists, right? So those networks becoming effective in the next 4 years is very vital. The second is 9 million people have died of COVID in this country. Okay, but 12 million people are in unions. So, we have to keep those numbers in mind. And those 12 million people who are in organized unions can stand up and speak for the 9 million people who have been neglected and left to die essentially by the Trump administration. So I think we have, really wonderful histories of labor organizing in this country. We have wonderful histories of anti-racist organizing in this country. What we need right now is a national conversation that links together workplaces with community activism. Okay, so unions cannot simply talk about waged work, because it's going to leave out this entire history of race and gender oppression that is vital right now, and it's in people's minds, it's in our lives, and unions have the collective power to actually have that conversation. And similarly, community activists need to think of ways to ally to labor, organized labor, and make that happen.
Before we go, can I just ask you a little about internationalism through the feminist lens, what that looks like?
So I was recently working with my friends and comrades at Code Pink, and one of the things I said was, if I could have a soundbite on what a feminist foreign policy looks like, then my soundbite would be, there are no feminist bombs, just as there are no feminist borders, right? So an internationalism has to be at the beating heart of feminism, right? We cannot have liberation of women, even liberation of Black and brown women in the United States, if that liberation comes at the cost of empire abroad, right? So we cannot have a welfare state, a robust welfare state program. Okay, let's say we get a robust welfare state program in the United States that really caters to the needs of Black and brown women. Okay, we have a good child care system and universal child care system and so on. But we cannot have that if America's power and the money of that is dependent on imperial interests abroad. Okay, so that kind of gain, you know, I was in Copenhagen last year, and you know, the heart of social democracy, wonderful maternity and paternity leaves for working parents, wonderful healthcare for everyone, and immigrant Muslim families living in ghettos. Okay, right. So that cannot be our feminism. Our feminism has to be internationalist and anti-imperialist in order to be the kind of feminism for the 99% that we need at this moment badly.
Is there one place or one group or one moment in time to reference?
For feminism for the 99%?
Well, I mean, internationalist feminist. I mean, it's if Copenhagen, and I'm very familiar, like, if they're not it, then who do we look to?
Well, I think we look to the international feminist strike movement that began in 2017, you know,
which now, you were a part of. Yeah.
Well, yes, I was a very small part of in the United States, but it was so fantastic because, and it still is, that because it was precisely the kind of international cooperation and networks from below, you know, that joined together to make March 8th shut down several cities across the world. Okay, and remember, one of the slogan that united us all was "Solidarity is our weapon." Right. So, international solidarity and the International Women's Strike. I'm so energized to see Poland actually going on strike right now. Polish women, because of their abortion ban. I'm so energized to see Chilean, them voting for the democracy, the new constitution, the anti-dictatorial constitution, and the movements on the streets being led by women. So I think we need to reinvigorate the question of the women's strike here in the United States and kind of join up with our sisters abroad in a movement of international solidarity.
I have so many more questions for you, but unfortunately we ran out of time. But if you're open, we'd love to have you on again, maybe once we have a sense of what's going to happen in this election world. But it's been such an honor. Tithi Bhattacharya, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. Right. We will be right back after this break with Matriarch board members and political director Dominique Shuminova and Melahat Rafiei. But first, make sure to click like and subscribe. Get in that chat. Smash that like. We have a big day today. After this show, a couple of hours later, we are going to be doing the Matriarch Summit. So if you don't have your tickets yet, you still have time. We're going to put that link in the bio, in the information center section of YouTube. So make sure to go in there and get your tickets for as low as $27. Or if you can't afford it, feel free to just give whatever you can, or free, of course. We will see you right after this break. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers. Hey guys, welcome back. I want to go over some of the stories at the top of my news feed, which we are doing mid-roll today because of some timing issues. So here are some of the stories from the top of my feed. According to a Bloomberg report, 80% of people who left the workforce this August and September, 80% were women. The study finds that the decision to leave work is one that women make reluctantly on the basis of pressure from family, inflexible workplace policy, and a lack of public policy support. That's why unions exist. While daycare remains cost prohibitive for many women, the pressure to juggle work and family care remains high, and it results, especially during crises like COVID, in forcing women out of the workplace. Latest from the neoliberal land, Neera Tanden, my favorite, responded to a recent New York Times piece about a Michigan county's further shift blue by arguing that, quote, wine moms are the political stronghold that can, I can't say with a straight face, that can't be underestimated. Let's look at the evidence. The trope of politically powerful suburban wine mom is wielded by centrists and Trump supporters alike as the only narrative of women and female empowerment. But many of the women making a big impact in Michigan politics are progressive working class women, maybe even union members. The shift in Oakland County, Michigan can be partially attributed to a demographic shift towards greater racial diversity, according to the New York Times. Politics across the state, as we observed earlier this week, has been driven by progressive women like Rashida Tlaib. It is not the suburban resistance getting out the progressive vote. It's actually resistance from the left, where the original resistance was. Neera Tanden, drinking wine while she's tweeting. Wine moms. I love wine. Giving wine a bad name. Okay, healthcare workers are suing OSHA and the Trump labor secretary, alleging that they have been endangered by inadequate COVID-19 protections. They raise the important point that frontline workers are placed in danger by the government's lack of support. The unions filing the suit, encompassing American Federation of Teachers and the Washington State Nurses Association, among others, represent over 500,000 healthcare professionals. This is huge. Working women, working people are on the front lines of this resistance, not wine moms. All right, we have a wonderful panel to get started. Before we go to the panel, while we're getting them in the room, we are going to be doing an election show on Tuesday, so make sure to mark your calendars, same time, same place, 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock Eastern. But we're also going to be tuning in live at different times throughout the day, just highlighting different stories. We're not going to go live all day, all night. We're just going to sort of tune in. So if you haven't already done so, click that alert in the that little bell next to subscribe, and that's how you're going to get alerts. And we'll say things like live from the streets of the protests, or live with an election historian, so you know what you're getting. But this is the time to subscribe. This is the time to click that alert, and this is the time to be a patron. So join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. All right, guys, we've been promoting this Matriarch Summit all week. I am thrilled to have two very important members of the Matriarch team on board who have been actively planning and working with candidates. Make sure to click your mute button off. All right, we have Dominique Shuminova, who is the political director for Matriarch, and Melahat Rafiei, who is I probably said her name wrong for the 9,000th time. She is on the board of Matriarch, and she works in politics. She works with working women. She helps get them elected. She works with Katie Porter, for example, and we're just really grateful to have you guys here to talk a little bit about what Matriarch is as we roll into this big summit. So I'm going to start with Dominique, since she runs day to day. She's like, I have a summit to plan right now. Why are you putting me on camera? So Dominique, I mean, tell us a little bit about your experience, as obviously as quickly as possible, just working with the campaigns and candidates and the types of candidates that Matriarch, represents.
Well, it feels like we're a new organization, but now it's been a little more than a year since we launched. So we have been through just about a full cycle with our candidates this year. Obviously, the biggest thrill of all was watching Cori Bush win. She's just, I can't wait to have her in Congress. I just get shivers every time I hear her speak. She's so incredible and so amazing. I just think she's going to blow us all out of the water and be just so transformative in that role. But we learned a lot from all of our candidates, and Melahat and I specifically worked really closely with them and all of their teams every step of the way, even as a pandemic hit and we had to completely switch up, how do you fundraise during a pandemic? How do you feel during a pandemic? And it was incredible to build that community together and to be a part of it. So it's been a privilege.
Melahat, Matriarch has a different type of candidate, right? We don't wait until they raise $250,000 or start, really build on the ground operations. We try to work with them early so that they can get to that level where even progressive organizations and institutions support them, and maybe a Bernie Sanders can endorse. But this early, the setting up the framework of a solid campaign is a lot harder, especially if you're not, if you're a first time candidate. So tell me a little bit about like the kind of work that you've done with these campaigns who, they're just average people. They're not like, political operatives. They're not, pulled from obscurity to go run a DCCC, whatever they do.
Well, they're community members and they're engaged. They're generally not independently wealthy, or else, they could be running their campaigns the way they want to. I think the early start is the most important thing we can do. All of these organizations that wait, you're letting really solid people pass by because they don't understand the process and the politics of politics. So getting them started early, making sure, I've never heard anybody say, gosh, I had way too much time to campaign. I had way too much time to raise money. Oh my gosh, I just didn't even know what to do with myself. No one needs a shorter runway when they're doing this. And those candidates who weren't successful this time, that was not their only run. It's the first run. And then, they have to be set up to run for either maybe local office if they're not running for Congress, because their leadership matters. And I love being part of Matriarch because we are on the ground dealing with folks, helping them make these decisions that nobody else was in the room with us when we had these difficult decisions to make, running campaigns against the grain, against the establishment, before it was cool to do so, before there were organizations like Matriarch to not just support the candidate, but also the campaign staff that's probably doing this for the first time too.
Right. I mean, that's actually an interesting point. So a lot of progressive candidates that are running now, and especially if they're working class women, they're inspired to run. They're members of their community. They're fed up. They're sick and disgusted with their leadership. I mean, pretty much every single one of our candidates said that. All of them, I think, said it. But they jump in the race and they're thinking like it's like Miss Smith Goes to Washington. It's just going to kind of come together. And I think a lot of women are it's very hard. Like, most of them had to take a pay cut, not work. Some were working while they were running for office, which is a full-time job in itself. And they didn't have the staff support, at least until the full staff support until the end, maybe, to run a campaign at full potential. So, Melahat, you mentioned not knowing what to do and how some of these big names and progressive organizations may not see how hard. Can you just talk through what kind of specific things stand in the way of these women?
I'll tell you, number one, it's fundraising. It's really hard to raise money. I work for women and I work with men, always progressives, always forward-thinking folks, but I see it day to day. How it's so much easier for the men to get that money. It's really strange. Women have to ask more times and more often and have to qualify their ask. Women are asked questions that men are not asked. Well, what are you going to do with your kids if you're Sacramento or if you're going to DC? These are not questions that are ever asked of men who are fathers or planning on being fathers. I think what we can do, though, again, it's the knowledge, what to not waste their time on. You make sure the candidates are doing what they need to be doing at the time that's relevant. Right now, I've got 10 races we're working on locally, and I tell everybody your number one priority between now and 8 p.m. on Tuesday is voter contact, and then a little bit more voter contact. I don't care if the voter's upset because they've been texted by everybody. they're upset about it, they could have voted early and they'd be off everyone's list, but it's having that sort of information on what to do with your time rather than sitting, responding to every ridiculous Facebook post or Twitter post, responding to non-media media, using your time wisely. We have one candidate in every one of these races and they can't be duplicated. And, like you said, I think Dominique and I were really helpful to these campaigns during this pandemic because a lot of us were figuring it out as we go. Mm-hmm. You don't have that army of volunteers that normally happens with the grassroots, groundswell progressive candidates that could knock on doors and do a lot of that work. So being there to guide them through, help them make decisions on the little slim, budgets that they had, I feel like is probably the best thing we could have done for them.
Dominique, what's your take on that? What do you think is some of the boundaries that, especially the first-time candidates, women face when, I'm just to throw out some examples, like getting media, for instance, like no one takes, I'll just say from my perspective as a candidate, former candidate myself, no one takes you seriously in the beginning. They keep setting benchmarks for you. First, it's like, oh, well, she's not going to do well. And then like you qualify, you raise the money to like get on the ballot. You get on the ballot. Okay, now she's on the ballot. Oh, well, she's not going to get on the debate stage. Oh, then you qualify to get on the debate stage. Then you're on the debate stage. And then they're like, well, they're not going to be able to organize the whatever. And then the media doesn't cover you. And then suddenly the media is like, they're horrible, they're not qualified, like they cover you, but they cover you from this like horrible perspective and sometimes worse. But Dominique, I mean, like you have worked with so many progressive women.
In hindsight, it kind of kills me because I feel like Semelis is actually the prime example of this for me. And there was even Semelis Lopez. Mm-hmm. Yep, who was running in New York 15 to fill an empty seat, and it was a very crowded race. And she did end up getting Bernie's endorsement, but of course, like early voting had already started by that point, and she did get AOC's endorsement. But I think she wasn't taken seriously, and people were saying, oh, we have to vote for the other guy or it'll be this really horrible guy. And then she got, she outperformed, she got 7 times what they had polled that she would get in terms of votes, and I feel like if you believe, then it is possible, and early money is everything and early support is everything. But she's somebody that we endorsed when they had like $14,000 in the bank and when people weren't taking her seriously. So that help can go a really long way, and that helping to get that media attention. But yeah, raising $1 million doesn't just happen, and getting media attention just because you've decided to announce that you're running for Congress also doesn't just happen. And you are competing for that money, and you're competing for those volunteers. And how do you build that sense when you don't have a campaign office and a sense of community and a sense of appreciation for your volunteers? And like, there's no pizza and beer and whatever, right, to make them feel like they're a part of something. And so in the Zoom age, trying to build that is hard. And of course, if you have access to wealth and wealthy friends, and then you can live income free for a year, or you don't have to give up your apartment and move back in with your parents when you're in your 40s just so that you can run for Congress. The sacrifices on a personal level that I've seen every single one of these women, and I was a campaign staffer, then a campaign consultant prior to being in this role with Matriarch. I've had a front row seat to just how difficult it is for women, and for progressive women especially, and working class progressive women even more so, just to run at all and to get any attention and to be taken seriously.
You say that because there is something that happens also in campaigns. If you have like a crowded field like Semelis's race in New York, so say you finally do raise enough money to have a campaign manager. They might not be the most in-demand campaign manager or other staff because the other campaigns have taken them, because the other campaigns had that corporate money or individual money. So
we've never seen anything like this. The sheer number of candidates running. Oh my gosh, not only were there empty seats, but you've also got, a lot of people running for the first time, which is really awesome, and a lot of progressives running. If anything, there's a concern with maybe like too many progressives in a given race.
In one race, you mean?
In one race, right? If you've got, it's not just like AOC was the first challenge to Crowley in 14 years. Okay, great. But imagine there were 5 people challenging Crowley at the same time, right? They're more likely to just split that vote, and he's more likely to win. So that's what we've been experiencing since AOC. There's a lot of people who think that they might be able to be the next AOC. And there's definitely, crowded fields happening. But they are then competing, someone like me that's managed campaigns before, there's just aren't enough of us to go around. So you're taking someone that's been like maybe a volunteer, like maybe a field organizer, and they're getting promoted for the first time. And even if you've done it many times, it's a very isolating role to be in charge of a campaign, just as much as as being a candidate. And so providing that community is something that Matriarch was able to do. And I think it goes on and it continues. The movement continues past Election Day and beyond any electoral cycle. And so does that sense of community of what we've built. So it's great just to see you guys, and Melahat especially. I miss you. It's been fun. It was fun to have our meetings with the candidates and get to provide them that support together. We're on opposite coasts, but I feel like we have such a bond.
And Melahat, I mean, that's such an interesting point, like where the campaigns, because there's such a shortage of progressive staff, experienced progressive staff, because there just hasn't been this kind of, you know, when we talk about the blacklist has always existed. It wasn't like an official thing. It was just called, you're not part of the DCCC, you're on the outside, you're working with the challenger. It may not be progressive, but you're working with the challengers. So there's this lack of infrastructure support everywhere. Institutional support on the progressive side, staffing, people are learning very quickly. And I think that's why your role was so valuable, because instead of, you know, a lot of these campaigns never had general consultants or even campaign managers full time. And we were able, I should say, because I wasn't, you were able to advise them in a way that a general consultant would. And essentially, I not the legal term of it, but pro bono, essentially, because it's not, because you weren't there full time. And so you could help more candidates in a way that a general consultant would normally and charge them $10,000 a month and, you know, all the other things that they do.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks for progressive candidates that are coming. You know, there is the politics of politics and the establishment within the Democratic Party that we're always fighting. I mean, Kevin De Leon, when he ran against Dianne Feinstein, all of a sudden he's popular again. We're like, we told you so. 2 years ago. We tried to challenge this woman then. Lindsey Graham, like, hi, we were there. You know, doesn't fit our matriarch, you know, model for Kevin, but I mean, point being that we've always been fighting the establishment. It's not fair. I don't think it's fair that only candidates who can afford it can get this advice. I mean, I genuinely believe my role is to just try to get those folks who are grassroots, who want to get involved in politics, to understand what the ugly world they're getting into. Like, just, hey, you're not going to have any friends. You're going to call them all for money, and they're going to stop picking up your phone calls. You know what you're getting, and that you're not in your own head. I feel like, again, the lonely world of campaign management, the voices in your head are the majority of who you're talking to. So being able to have a group for them to be able to bounce ideas off of and know that, I think is really helpful. So I'm honored to have been part of it with Dominique. She was just, I mean, pregnant with a kid and running all this stuff, like, oh my God, the embodiment of what we do. The embodiment of what we do.
Real quick before we go, I'll start with Dominique. Dominique, what was the story from one of the candidates that stood out with you for you the most? Like, they all had such powerful stories, either their background or what happened during the campaigns, but just to give folks a sense of like what really, you know, what these women are taking on and what they're sacrificing.
I think the women who were running without health insurance became, like, you know, really in stark focus once the pandemic hit, and that included Semelis and Nabila. Semelis is also in a very densely populated district in the South Bronx that was disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I felt like that was very powerful, that they were willing, in some cases, to give up having employer health insurance in order to run, which is just such an enormous sacrifice. And Corey, who won, I'm just so inspired by the fact that she just never let anything throw her off her game. Anyone who's watching this, who's a progressive, they know, you know, that they throw all kinds of stuff at you to try and distract you. I mean, her car got shot up at one point. Actually, Melanie Dorigo also had the most horrible language thrown at her, death threats, and just like kept focused on putting one foot in front of the other. And I'm so inspired by that.
Melahat, what was one of the moving stories that you heard?
There were so many. I mean, seeing the women when COVID hit and seeing what was happening in New York, seeing Melanie's husband in the background, singing like with her headphones in a very loud apartment, doing whatever it took to communicate, and then seeing what happened to the women on the West Coast, Rebecca in Washington, Ava in Arizona, how the establishment was focused on attacking them. You know, they were harder on them than the Republicans were. Yeah. So, you know, just having that perseverance to push through and be in it together. Honestly, for me, being on the West Coast, I let my clients do a lot of what we saw happening on the East Coast, seeing the experiences of those gathering signatures in New York. Those aren't things that we do in California to get on the ballot, you know? And that happened right in the heart of this pandemic when New York was being shut down. So much perseverance, so much resilience. And I do are running again, whether it's for that seat or another seat, taking over their local Democratic parties, making them more progressive, because that's going to be our call to make sure we get past this election, God willing, Goddess willing, get Joe Biden elected, and then move the party to as far left as we possibly can.
Yeah. we have to start holding them hostage, and that happens when we get more numbers, because they're controlling the ballot lines, they're controlling the rules, they're controlling everything that's really hindering us. And when people say like, "Oh, Naomi, you talk about reform all the time," listen, I'm so frustrated with the Democratic Party. But I also understand the rules of the Democratic Party, and they're a hindrance to us. So we have to really hold them hostage in the same way, on the outside and on the inside, the way that Melahat does and Dominique does. Real quick, I want to share the story that you just mentioned, getting on the ballot. Ihsan Lakey, I mean, she never showed any frustration, but they were really gunning for her, because that is a powerful seat in Massachusetts. And she, whether trying to block her from getting on the ballot, which is a big thing that they do in the Northeast, or just kind of Alex Morse style tactics against her that also did not get the attention, maybe because for whatever reasons. I mean, there was a big coalition behind Alex Morse, but, Ihsan Lakey is also a Muslim woman. And I think sometimes the press, I mean, I can speak from my own experience, sometimes the press just doesn't want to hear it. And I think that's one thing with Matriarch we're really trying to do, is to create a sisterhood so we have each other's backs when things go wrong, because it's very hard to break through the press when they are aligned with capital, when they're aligned with institutions that want to make sure progressive women are not front and center talking about their stories in Congress. Much love to you all. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, make sure to get your tickets to the Matriarch Summit. Let's put that thing on screen again, the graphic on screen, starting at $27. Some of the speakers, Dominique, do you want to roll them with me? Let's go through.
Oh, no, I'm not looking at my list. Well,
it's on screen. It's on screen. Yeah.
Okay, so Cori Bush, needs no introduction. Sarah Nelson, Barbara Smith, basically invented intersectional feminism. Francesco Fiorentini, I've been a huge fan for years, as I'm sure you have too. That's one of our candidates there. Melanie DeRigo, big fighter for the working class on Long Island. Nabila Islam in Georgia. Eileen Flanagan, who's going to tell us how we can help prevent a coup. Jovanka Beckles, who we've worked closely with on our board of advisors with Matriarch, who's also running for office out in California. We've got Marquita Bradshaw, Kate Albright-Hanna, Jane McAlevey, also total legend, Christine Pellegrino, and Tara Huska, who is a tribal attorney and the advisor to Bernie Sanders on Indigenous affairs.
Awesome. Special thanks to Professor Harvey Kaye and everyone in the live chat. Make sure to listen to Harvey and I have a conversation about why Bernie Sanders should not be labor secretary. Important. So make sure to listen to that on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. I think we have to do an addendum as to why Elizabeth Warren should not join the Treasury, because we don't want to lose a Senate seat. Oh, there's my, I just gave that one away. Special thank you to MIDI Doctors and Jules for working the algorithms, and Socially Democrat, thank you for the love. Big thanks to Bob and Chokin for keeping the chat room honest. We will see you on Election Day. Mark your calendars if you haven't already. Click the subscription, the alert, the bell, so you know when we're going live. But we're going to do a special show on Tuesday, and then we're going to come in a couple of times during the night just to cover what's going on. If you haven't voted already, my God, go vote in person. Drop off, if you have a mail-in ballot and you didn't send it in time, drop it off to the Board of Elections or to the location that is provided on your mail-in ballot where you can drop it off. Even if you're in New York, even if you're in California. Whoops. I'm so passionate. Greek woman talking with her hands. Even if you're in those states, we need to show as many votes as possible, as Sam Cedar says, 10 million, so that if the Supreme Court is deciding on some small town in Wisconsin and the mail-in voting in that county, that they understand that there's a 10 million person advantage, and that they are, they all have their own personal politics, as we know. So, all right, much love to you all. Go check out the Matriarch Summit, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Oh. Thank you, S. Blackmare. I just saw that one.